Today, let's dive into a really interesting puzzle in the world of health tech. What happens when the brand new, super upgraded version of a life-saving device, well, just doesn't seem to work as well as the old one? We're talking about continuous glucose monitors, and a mystery that pits the official numbers against what people are actually experiencing. So this whole thing kind of blew up thanks to a really clever experiment by a user named Dan Heller. See, when he got his new Dexcom G7 monitor, he didn't just toss the old G6. Nope, he wore them both at the same time, side by side, to see how they stacked up. And when he found, really kicked off a huge conversation about what the word accuracy truly means.
And that brings us to the big question, right? Dexcom launched the G7 claiming it was their most accurate sensor ever. So how can a device that's supposed to be statistically better in a lab fail the test of daily life for the very people who rely on it to, stay alive? It's a real head-scratcher. All right, to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to look at the device at the center of all this. This is where you start to see this huge gap open up between what the company promised and the problems users started flagging.
Just look at this contrast. It's pretty stark. On one side, you've got Dexcom's official line. The G7 is a massive leap forward, way more accurate than the last one. But then, on the other side, you've got the real-world experience. A flood of reports about erratic readings, a couple of class action lawsuits, and even a public Facebook group with thousands of people sharing their frustrations. It's like they're talking about two totally different devices. So, what's causing this disconnect? To really wrap our heads around this accuracy paradox, we need to look at a few of the potential culprits and how the company's been responding to all this user feedback. Well, one possible reason could be manufacturing hiccups. In March 2024, the FDA actually sent Dexcom a warning letter. Turns out, an audit found an unvalidated component in some of the sensors that made them perform worse. Dexcom says they've already removed that material. And to be fair, these kinds of problems aren't just a Dexcom thing. Their biggest competitor, Abbott, recently had to recall millions of their own sensors for being inaccurate. Through it all, Dexcom has stuck to their guns, saying accuracy is their absolute #1 priority. But here's the thing. Manufacturing issues alone just don't seem to explain the whole story, especially since the company is still so confident in its accuracy claims. And to understand why, we have to talk about one very specific, very important number, the MARD metric. So, this number is called MARD. It stands for Mean Absolute Relative Difference. Okay, that's a mouthful, but all it really is a percentage. It measures how different the sensor's reading is from a super accurate gold standard lab test. It's the industry standard, and the rule is super simple. The lower the MARD number, the more accurate the device is supposed to be. And this number is everything to the company's case. Dexcom, and their competitors too, they advertise a MARD of around 8% for these new devices. Just to give you some context, anything under 10% is generally considered really, really good, accurate enough to make decisions about insulin dosing. So on paper, that 8% number makes the device look incredibly reliable. But here comes the twist. What if that number, that core MARD metric that everything is built on, has some serious blind spots? What if the way it's measured in the lab doesn't actually capture what's happening out here in the real world? Well, it turns out there are some pretty big, let's call them loopholes, in how MARD gets calculated. First off, the manufacturers get to design their own clinical trials. Second, they're often comparing the sensor's reading to stable blood from a vein, not the rapidly changing blood you get from a finger prick at home. And here's the real kicker. The tests can be set up to avoid the times when these sensors are famously less accurate, like right after you eat, or at the very beginning and end of a sensor's life. There's just no universal standardized way to run these tests. So what does that all mean? Well, when independent researchers, like a group over at the Institute for Diabetes Technology in Germany, run more demanding real-world style tests, they get very different numbers. While the companies are advertising a MARD around 8%, these independent studies are finding it's often actually closer to 10% or sometimes even higher. That difference is the gap between the marketing claim and the user's reality. And this brings us right back to the heart of the whole issue. If the official number can be a little misleading, what's actually important to the person whose health depends on this little piece of tech every single day? This quote from Dan Heller, the guy who started this whole thing, just says it perfectly. He says, "I don't care about MARD. I want data that is reliably actionable." And that is the key word, actionable. For someone managing diabetes, one perfect number from a lab doesn't mean a thing if the data they're seeing on their phone moment to moment is jumping all over the place and can't be trusted to make a critical decision, like how much insulin to take. So the real takeaway here isn't just about one company or one device. It's about a bigger systemic disconnect. You have the quantitative data, the hard numbers from a controlled lab on one side. And then you have the qualitative lived experience of real users on the other. This whole situation just goes to show that what you can measure perfectly in a lab isn't always what's most useful for a person's health. And that leaves us with a final, really thought-provoking question. As we all lean more and more on technology and data to manage our health, this whole story forces us to ask, when the lab numbers and our own experience tell two completely different stories, which one do we trust?